Hello, hello. I am live again for the second time today to show the agent from earlier actually working pretty well. So if you weren't in the earlier stream, the goal was to build an agent to manage my LinkedIn account. The first thing I wanted to do was manage all the invitations because I got pretty behind on them. I've been, away for a month. Recovering from surgery, and they piled up. These are probably from the last 6 months. I've been very behind. It's been a busy 6 months. So I wanted an agent that would process them using a similar logic to how I process them, which is usually I look to see how many connections people have. I look to see if they're developers, if they're going to be talking about technical stuff. And, then I'll either accept or ignore depending on that. And if they're a recruiter, I pretty much always ignore because I have other ways of communicating with recruiters. So, early we discussed different approaches for how to build an agent for LinkedIn. So we talked about, using like a LinkedIn MCP server with a tool like Claude, really using it for a more user-facing way. There's not an official LinkedIn MCP server. I found one MCP server, but generally I wasn't very excited about this approach because it wouldn't give me a whole lot of control. It wouldn't give me kind of the bulk automation that I really wanted. I talked about using computer use tools like browser use and computer use agent. And those are interesting, especially for people who are new to browser automation. My preference is to use Playwright directly. And there's two ways of doing that. One is using the Playwright MCP server, or the other way is using the Playwright package directly. So that's what we ended up doing. The final option would be doing LinkedIn API calls. It turns out that LinkedIn API is not particularly accessible to a hobbyist developer from what I could tell. So this didn't seem like something I could easily get started with. So these were the two approaches that I tried out. First, using the OpenAI-Agents SDK with the Playwright MCP server. That ended up going way over token limits and just generally being inefficient and slow. And so then I moved to using the same SDK, but with direct calls to the Playwright Python package, which gives me a high level of control, and I can really optimize how it's working and how many calls it's making and how many tokens it's sending. And I had some to-dos here, and I figured out those to-dos. So let's just go ahead and demo it, because that's really what you're here for. Why did I even talk about all that stuff? Okay. So here is the Python file. So let me start with just demoing it. So I'll go ahead and run this, and you're going to see it pop open a Chromium browser where you will see me logged in. And I'll talk about how that logging in is working, because that was actually not very straightforward. And what you can see is that hands off, my hands are off. See, no hands. It is going through and it is deciding whether to accept or ignore connections. And in this case, I decided to limit it to 10, but I can go ahead and, increase that to 30, whatever. I could go to 100, I could go to 1,000. Just as we're developing something, it's nice to start off with small things. And then it tells me which of them it accepted. It also says which of them ignores. Like in this case, actually, I think I'll go ahead and, accept that connection because I think that, would be actually a good connection because they're at Microsoft. One thing I should do is have it figured out if somebody's at Microsoft. That's not actually, as far as I can tell, that's not really obvious when you're looking at the invitation. I don't think it shows directly in the invitation whether you're both at Microsoft. So for that, I'd have to actually go and open the page. And I was trying to avoid having to open the page just because that does it's a whole other web request and that's going to slow things down. But that would give me additional information like, does this person work at Microsoft? So how did this work? What was interesting and difficult about this? So What we have here is a Python script that brings in the OpenAI-Agents SDK and also brings in the Playwright Python SDK. And we set up a OpenAI client that either uses GitHub models or Azure models or Ollama models. I've only tested with Azure and GitHub. In theory, Ollama models would work if their tool calling is reliable. And 3.1 is the best I've found for tool calling, but haven't tried it for this one, so who knows? Then what we have is the main code here, which creates an OpenAI agent. And that agent's just, so the only place I'm using an LLM here is purely to decide, hey, am I going to accept or ignore this request? That is the only point where I've brought in an LLM. Everything else is browser automation from Playwright and Python code. But this was the point where I wanted the LLM so that it could, reason about, oh, is this person a developer? Are they technical? Like, does it seem like somebody that Pamela would accept if she was making this decision herself, right? So what we do is, so here's the tricky thing, is that when I first did this, it made me log into LinkedIn every single time that I started up the browser. And that, of course, is really annoying. And I was trying to figure out a way around it. Like, originally, I wanted it to just automate my main browser that I use. This is my primary Edge that I use. But what I found out is that the Edge security policy and the Chrome security policy means that you cannot do browser automation on your main default browser. So what you have to do instead is follow this documentation here that describes how you can reuse authentication state across sessions. So I have this state.json, which is in a get ignored file. That's very important. We definitely don't want to check any of this in. And what I do is that if I am not logged in, so the first thing I'm going to do is go to LinkedIn, see if I'm logged in. If not, I'm going to the login screen, waiting for me to log in, and then saving that storage state into this ignored file. And what you'll notice is up here, when we create the browser, we actually tell it like, hey, pull in the storage state from that file. So that's how we're able to maintain the cookies across these sessions, so that every time I start this up, it's going to have my logged in cookies. So this is generally the flow that we'd have to do for any sort of personal account automation, whether it was LinkedIn or Blue Sky or whatnot. All right, and so then we can go ahead and load the invitation manager. And the tricky thing here is actually finding the things that we need to find, because LinkedIn has very, very difficult HTML to select. The HTML it's not very consistent. It's not a clear a clear selector to use, but we figured it out earlier. If you look at the class names here, it's a lot of underscore, number. And the text is also highly variable too, right? It depends on whether it's a person, whether it's a page, whether you have connections with them, whether they follow you, right? So there's just a high degree of variability, both in the CSS of each of these elements and in the text of these elements. And that makes it hard to do browser automation on top, but not impossible. It just makes it harder, right? Luckily, these ignore and accept buttons are always done the same way. So that was pretty reliable. So we find all the invitations, and then we go through and start processing. So for each of them, we look in their link, we get their job title, we check for mutual connections, and then we pass it to the agent. So finally, this is the point where we pass it to the agent. We say, okay, agent, here is all the information, and you're going to make a decision based off of that. And we can look back up here at the agent definition. Let's see, here's the agent. It's in charge of accepting. It says, accept if the person has a technical role in mutual connections, ignore if they're a recruiter. If you're unsure, respond with undecided. And we also pass it a tool call that actually makes the decision and accepts or ignores, right? So that tool call is going to be called with either accept, ignore, or undecided. I used an enum here to be a little more structured about it. So that's what the tool call will get called with, is one of these values. And then, depending on what it is, it's either going to click the accept button, it's going to click the ignore button, or it's going to just say, oh, we're just going to return undecided if it can't find anything. So that will actually take the action, right? So we're using the tool to take the action. So going back down here. All right, so we run the agent and then we keep track. So a lot of this stuff is actually just about keeping track of what happened at the end. So we add, and say, oh, this is what happened. This was the decision we made. And this code here is just because this is an infinitely loading page. So if we get to the end of the page and we still want to process additional ones, we will scroll and prompt more cards to load. So we scroll, we sleep for 2 seconds and hope that more cards will load in that we can process. And then at the end here, this is just our summary. So this is just going through and saying, hey, here's who's accepted, here's ignore, here's who we didn't decide on. So that way, if I don't like any of the decisions, I can go and say, oh, okay, I'm actually going to accept, or I'm going to, unconnect from this person or whatnot, or I can, tweak the logic to improve for the future. But generally, it's working pretty well. So the main thing is that it'd be nice if I had a little more information, like whether somebody worked at the same job, maybe look at the most recent post. All of that would be the kind of thing I would do if I was doing it myself. And there we go. So let's just go ahead and run that again just to see it in action once more. Now that we've stepped through the code. And what do I have it set to now is 30. So it should go through and try to process 30 invitations. It's either processing 30 invitations or it's trying to accept 30. I think it's just processing 30 invitations. Let's see. And it's going through and accepting. It says found 10 initial ones. I wonder if it's gonna, okay. And then it's processed. Oh, scrolling to load more. Okay, great. So the scrolling is working. Scrolling to load more. So I think it basically shows about 10 at a time and then processes the 10 and then scrolls to load more. So ideally I can run this and walk away and have it manage my entire notifications tab. So this is pretty cool. This is what I'm calling like a personal agent, right? It's an agent for for my own account, and it's not something I'm putting into production. It's just something that is automating something I do on a daily basis that I think that I can defer to an LLM and that I just don't find super enjoyable, right? It's not that fun to just sit there and click the button. So I think this is an interesting use of LLMs, is just to as developers, is to make our little personal agents that we're not necessarily going to be using for high risk situation, right? This is a low risk situation. If I mess up, I make the wrong decision, it's really not a big deal at all, right? Either I'm connected to somebody that I wouldn't have clicked connect to, or vice versa. But all of this, is reversible, and it's not the end of the world. It's just a social network. So I think that's a nice use for LLMs, is because this is a low risk decision. I also want to use it in order to look through my LinkedIn messages in order to figure out, like, oh, are there any messages I should definitely respond to that I've been flaking out on, ignoring? I also want to use it to look through my LinkedIn mentions to see if they're comments, because the mentions, the notifications the notifications, it doesn't highlight when somebody comment. And that's really what I care about, is like, when are people commenting? Because then I want to read their comment, I want to reply, right? And I haven't figured out how to get LinkedIn to do that. So ideally, I can just pass it to the LM and it can tell me whether there's something really interesting that I want to look at. So there we go. Let me go ahead and let's see, add whatever code we just did. What did we do? I think we just increased the thing. Okay, push. All right. And let me go ahead and share the repo for this. So if you want to try it out, you can try it out. And I think this is also just a good base repository if you want to build some other sort of personal account agent with any sort of user login, right? The general idea would be check if you're logged in. If not, log in, save the state, do a login, and then do whatever you want to do. If you're having a hard time like generating the Playwright code, what you can do is kind of copy and paste the HTML, or you can use Playwright Code Gen. That's what I was doing earlier as well, is to use the Code Gen tool, and that can help you write the actual Playwright code. Okay, and that's all I'm going to show today. Bye, everyone. See you next time.